The cameras blinked to life with their usual polished glow, the iconic 60 Minutes music rolling in the background. David Muir sat perfectly composed in his chair, his trademark calm smile steady as he turned toward the guest of the evening. "Prince Harry, thank you for joining us tonight," he began, his tone warm, almost soothing, designed to put even the most cautious guests at ease. Harry nodded politely, his expression unreadable, but polite enough to fit the opening frame. At first the questions came easily, predictable, rehearsed. Muir asked about Harry's work with veterans, about his growing family, and about life beyond the palace walls. Harry responded smoothly, his voice steady, his hands folded neatly in his lap. To the untrained eye, it seemed like any other interview. But beneath the lights, something was brewing. Muir's questions began to shift almost imperceptibly at first. Instead of focusing on charity or family, he leaned into the more uncomfortable terrain, public perception, criticism, and the contradictions the press often highlighted. His words were carefully chosen, sharp enough to cut but wrapped in a velvet glove of professionalism. "Some say, Prince Harry," Muir began, "that stepping away from the monarchy was about independence. And yet, here you are, still speaking about it publicly, writing about it. How do you reconcile that?" Harry's jaw tightened, just slightly, but the cameras caught it. His polite composure began to crack, a flicker of irritation crossing his eyes. "It's not about dwelling on the past," he replied, his tone firmer now. "It's about correcting the lies, setting the record straight. There's a difference." Muir smiled thinly, leaning forward. "But critics argue that each time you speak, the wounds are reopened rather than healed. They wonder if silence might bring more peace." His words hung heavy in the air. The studio, though filled with people, felt suddenly quiet. Harry shifted in his seat, his hands unclasping, one resting firmly on the arm of the chair. His body language was changing, the cool calm beginning to give way to something sharper, more defensive. "Silence only benefits those who abuse power," he said, his voice edged with steel. "And I won't be complicit in that." The audience watching at home could feel the shift. The charm of the introduction was gone. In its place was a palpable tension, thick enough to choke. Muir, sensing the shift, didn't retreat. He pressed harder. "But Harry," he said carefully, "don't you think some people see this as hypocrisy? Wanting privacy, yet appearing in books, in interviews, in television specials? Isn't that a contradiction worth addressing?" Harry's lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment he didn't answer. He blinked slowly, his silence louder than words, and the camera zoomed in to capture every flicker of emotion on his face. Finally he spoke, low and deliberate. "Wanting privacy," he said, "doesn't mean disappearing. It means choosing when and how to speak. I will not apologize for telling my truth." The tension was no longer subtle. It was building, coiling tighter with every exchange. Harry's shoulders, once relaxed, were squared now, his posture stiff. His eyes locked onto Muir with a kind of icy defiance, daring him to push further. And Muir, seasoned as ever, held that gaze, his next question already sharp on his tongue. "You've mentioned truth?" "Harry," Muir said, "but some argue your truth has come at the cost of family bonds, of traditions, of trust. Do you ever regret the damage your words may have caused?" The air in the studio thickened. Harry inhaled sharply, leaning back just slightly, as though weighing whether to unleash what was on his mind. His voice, when it came, was clipped, measured, but filled with barely contained fire. "Regret," he repeated. "The only regret I would have is remaining silent and allowing lies to define me and my family. If people are uncomfortable with honesty, that's not my burden to carry." The audience at home could sense it. The polite interview they'd expected was gone. In its place was a confrontation simmering dangerously close to boiling over. Every question was a step closer to the edge, every answer a reminder that Harry's patience was thinning. His body language betrayed him, crossed arms, sharp movements, his jaw set like stone. David Muir sat calmly, unshaken, though even he could feel the electricity sparking between them. He glanced at his notes, then back at Harry, his expression composed but his eyes sharper now, knowing the moment had shifted. "Well," he said softly, "that's certainly one way to put it. But our viewers may still wonder, how long can you keep living in this storm you've created?" Harry didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted off camera for a brief moment, then snapped back to Muir. His next words were quiet but heavy, carrying the weight of warning. The storm was created long before I ever spoke. Don't mistake my voice for the thunder. A hush swept over the room. The audience knew it, Muir knew it, Harry knew it. Something had cracked open. The setup was over. The air was electric with suspense. And though no one said it aloud, everyone watching could feel it in their bones. An explosive moment was coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything. The atmosphere in the studio was polished and professional, but beneath the lights, something heavier lingered. David Muir had started with polite questions, the kind any guest could breeze through. Yet his tone began to sharpen, and the shift was subtle but undeniable. He leaned forward, his notes resting loosely in his hand, eyes narrowing with quiet intent. "Prince Harry," Muir began, his voice steady but edged, "in your recent interviews, you've spoken about seeking privacy and peace. Yet here you are again in front of the cameras. Some would say that's contradictory. How do you reconcile that?" The audience leaned in slightly, the words hanging like a blade. Harry shifted in his seat, his back stiffening, his hands tightening together. He gave a short laugh that didn't quite mask the irritation in his voice. "Contradiction?" he repeated. "I'm here because silence allows lies to spread. If I don't speak, the narrative gets written for me. That's not contradiction. That's survival." Muir didn't flinch. He pressed again, calmly but firmly. "But Harry, you've also said the attention has been unbearable, that you want it out of the spotlight. And yet every headline, every documentary, every book, it's all centered around your story. Isn't there some truth that part of you needs this stage?" Harry's eyes sharpened, his jaw tightening. The studio lights caught the faint glint of sweat on his forehead. He leaned forward now, closing the gap between them with his stare. "You think I need this?" Harry's tone was clipped, sharp enough to cut. "You think this is about craving attention? Try living through what I've lived. Try having your family, your trauma, your every private word twisted for entertainment. Do you honestly think I enjoy sitting here being dissected like some exhibit?" The silence that followed was thick. The audience, usually quick to murmur or clap, sat frozen. Every eye flicked from Muir to Harry, sensing that the interview had crossed into dangerous territory. David Muir kept his composure, but his voice grew firmer. "With respect, Harry, I'm not questioning your pain. I'm asking why, if the spotlight has hurt you, you continue to return to it. People at home are wondering the same thing. Is this healing, or is it fueling the very cycle you say you want to escape?" Harry's breath quickened, his words spilling faster now. "You call it a cycle. I call it accountability. If I walked away, kept silent, people would still attack me. At least this way I fight back. At least this way I'm not letting them win." The tension was no longer beneath the surface. It was radiating off both men. Muir leaned forward now, not backing down. "But Harry, some would say that fighting back has become your brand. That you've built a second life on telling the world what the palace did wrong. Do you see how that might look less like healing and more like profiting from pain?" Harry froze for half a second, the words sinking in like ice water. His lips pressed into a thin line. The audience gasped, the first sound breaking the fragile silence. A few whispered, others exchanged glances as if realizing something irreversible had just been said. Harry's voice, when it came, was lower, colder. "Profiting? You have no idea what it costs. You think book deals or interviews replace what was taken from me? You think money makes betrayal easier? That's insulting, David." The cameras caught the flicker of anger in Harry's eyes. He sat taller, his voice cutting through the silence like steel. "Let me make this very clear. I didn't ask for the spotlight. It was forced on me at birth. And if speaking out makes people uncomfortable, good. Maybe discomfort is what's needed to expose the truth." Muir shifted slightly, but his tone was relentless. "But at what point, Harry, does exposing the truth become repeating the past? At what point does the fight itself keep you tied to the very crown you claim to have escaped?" Harry's hands pressed against his knees now, knuckles white. His breathing was audible in the tight microphone silence. The tension wasn't just visible, it was suffocating. The audience didn't move. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Everyone was waiting for the breaking point, sensing that one more question might push Harry past the edge. Harry's response came slow, deliberate, each word wrapped in fury. "You don't get to tell me how to heal. You don't get to dictate when the story ends. That's mine, and I'll keep telling it until people understand." The air snapped tight. Muir, unflinching, set his cards down. His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "And maybe, Prince Harry, that's the contradiction the world is struggling with. You say you've escaped, but sitting here today, it seems the crown still controls every word you speak. The audience erupted, half in gasps, half in murmurs. Harry leaned back, eyes blazing, his silence louder than words. For the first time, it looked like the interview might collapse entirely. The turning point had arrived, and no one in the studio could predict what would come next. The air in the studio had shifted. The polite exchanges and cautious answers were gone, replaced by a current of raw tension. Prince Harry sat stiffly, his hands clenched on his lap, eyes burning with frustration. David Muir leaned forward, refusing to soften his line of questioning. "You keep talking about truth." "Harry," Muir said evenly, "but critics argue you've reshaped that truth depending on the stage you're on. First in interviews, then in a book, then in a documentary. How do you answer those who say your story keeps changing?" Harry's face flushed, his composure cracking. He let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "Changing? That's exactly the problem, David. The media twists everything I say. One word out of context becomes a headline. One sentence becomes a scandal. My truth hasn't changed. The way it's been reported has. And you know it." The audience shifted in their seats, a ripple of uneasy murmurs spreading through the studio. Some nodded in sympathy, others frowned, sensing the hostility building. Muir, however, didn't back down. His tone hardened, his questions slicing through the tension. "But Harry, these are your words. Direct quotes. If the media is twisting them, why do the contradictions appear in your own voice, in your own accounts? Isn't there some responsibility on your part?" Harry leaned forward, his tone fierce now, every syllable carrying the weight of years of bottled anger. "Responsibility? My responsibility was to survive, to protect my wife, to protect my children. Do you understand what it's like to be hunted day after day, painted as a villain in papers that profit off your pain? The same press that hounded my mother until the night she died is the same press dissecting every move I make. And now you're sitting here acting as though I created this circus." The studio fell into a heavy silence. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in tighter, catching the fury blazing in his eyes. Muir straightened, refusing to waver. "With respect, Harry, the press didn't force you to write a memoir. They didn't force you to do a Netflix series. They didn't force you to sit here today. You chose those platforms. And when you make those choices, people are going to ask, why? Why keep revisiting the wounds if not to keep them open?" Harry's jaw clenched, his voice rising with a heat that startled even the crew. "Because no one else will tell the truth. That's why. You call it revisiting wounds, I call it exposing corruption. I will not let history repeat itself. Not for my children, not for anyone else trapped in that system." The words hit the air like gunfire. Gasps echoed from the audience. Producers watching from the control room scrambled, voices crackling through headsets. Keep rolling, don't cut away." But their panic was evident. This was no longer a controlled interview. It was spiraling live on air. Muir leaned forward now, his own tone sharpened. "But do you hear yourself, Harry? Every time the palace is mentioned, every time the crown is brought up, you're right back in it. You claim you've broken free, yet here you are again, letting it define you. Isn't this proof that no matter how much you say you've moved on, the crown still has you in its grip?" Harry's anger boiled over. His face was crimson, his voice thunderous. Don't you dare tell me I haven't broken free." I walked away. I gave up everything, titles, money, security, for the chance to protect my family. And if the world can't see that, then maybe the world doesn't deserve my truth. The audience gasped louder this time, some clapping, others whispering in shock. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, eyes wide at the intensity on stage. Behind the cameras, a producer waved frantically at the crew. "We need to cut. This is spiraling." But the director barked back. "No. This is gold. Stay with it." Muir, still calm, locked eyes with Harry. "But Harry, isn't that the contradiction? You say you walked away, but every platform you take brings you right back to it. People are watching this and asking, are you escaping the crown or are you using it?" That was the final spark. Harry shot forward, his voice echoing through the studio. "Enough. You sit there behind your desk, asking questions as if my life is entertainment. You don't know what it's like to have your family destroyed by lies, to bury your mother because of hounding cameras, to wake up every day to headlines branding you a traitor. Don't tell me I'm using anything. I'm surviving." The audience erupted, some in applause, others in shocked gasps. The tension was unbearable. Cameras zoomed in on Harry's furious expression, sweat glistening under the studio lights. Producers backstage shouted over one another. The feed director, clutching his headset, torn between cutting to commercial or letting the chaos play out. "This is history," one whispered. "We can't stop now." Harry's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, his anger consuming the room. Muir sat still, eyes steady, the calm anchor to Harry's storm. The clash had reached its peak, and the entire studio knew this was no longer just an interview. It was a live confrontation, one that would ripple far beyond the cameras. The stage was set. Something unprecedented was unfolding, and the world was watching every second. The breaking point came without warning. Prince Harry's chest rose and fell as he glared at David Muir, his fists tight on the armrests. For a heartbeat, silence filled the studio. Then, suddenly, he tore at the small microphone clipped to his lapel. "This is a trap," he growled, his voice carrying through the still live feed before the sound technician could mute him. The words cut like thunder, reverberating in the hushed studio. Gasps rippled across the audience. A woman in the second row clutched her chest. A man muttered, "Oh my God." The room, moments earlier simmering with tension, now erupted into chaos. Harry yanked the wire free, the sharp pop of feedback echoing across the set. The microphone clattered onto the floor. He stood abruptly, the studio chair skidding back. His face burned crimson, his eyes locked on Muir. "You wanted spectacle," he spat. "You got it. But don't you dare pretend this was a fair conversation. This was never an interview. It was an ambush." The cameras, still rolling, captured every flicker of fury on his face. Muir remained seated, frozen, his hands resting on the desk, his eyes wide with shock. The anchor, known for his composure, seemed suddenly unsure whether to press on or let silence carry the moment. The producers' voices crackled frantically through headsets backstage. "Cut to commercial now," shouted one. Another barked back, "No, stay with it. This is history unfolding." Harry turned sharply, his steps heavy against the polished floor. Each stride was punctuated by the sharp click of his shoes, echoing like gunfire. The studio audience, caught between awe and disbelief, whispered and gasped. Some reached for their phones, knowing instantly that what they were witnessing would ripple across the world. At the edge of the set, he paused just long enough to look back, his voice trembling with rage and defiance. "The world will see what this really was. A setup, a performance designed to humiliate. But you don't get to write my story. Not anymore." With that, he shoved through the studio doors. They swung shut behind him with a metallic crash that left the room in stunned silence. Muir exhaled slowly, running a hand across his notes as though grounding himself. The camera remained fixed on him, capturing every flicker of hesitation. For once, the calm interviewer had no words ready. Finally, his voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be right back." The broadcast cut to black. But the moment was already immortal. Within minutes, clips of Harry storming out began appearing across social media. Screenshots spread like wildfire. Headlines erupted before the credits even finished rolling. "Prince Harry explodes on live TV. 60 minutes chaos, interview cut short. Harry declares interview a trap." In living rooms across the world, people sat stunned, replaying the images again and again. Some defended Harry, claiming he'd been cornered. Others insisted it revealed a side of him he'd long tried to hide. Either way, no one could look away. Backstage, producers buried their faces in their hands, half thrilled and half terrified by the fallout they'd just unleashed. Muir remained at his desk, staring into the darkened lens of the camera, silently aware that his name would forever be attached to one of the most explosive interviews in television history. And as Harry disappeared into the night beyond the studio doors, one truth became clear. This was no longer just an interview gone wrong. It was a defining moment, one destined to be replayed, dissected, and remembered for years to come. The fallout had begun,